Good evening, everybody. Okay, can we have a little bit more enthusiasm? Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good, I appreciate that. So my name's Andrew Martin. That's my name on the screen. I'm the Dean of the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, and I'm here to welcome you to our first of four community forums. We're here to talk about a topic that's critical to the future not only of the University of Michigan, but also the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. For almost a year, we as a community have worked together to write the college's 5-year strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. That process involved hundreds of people across the college, many of whom are here with us tonight. You all shared your experiences, your hopes, and your frustrations. You've all made suggestions and provided insightful critiques of past practice and thoughts about future practice. I'm here to thank you. Your input to date has not only made the plan better, your hard work and dedication has made it possible. I appreciate your participation here tonight because diversity, equity, inclusion must be more than a slogan. Now, perhaps more than ever, we need to embrace the proposition that diversity makes us stronger and better, and that access, despite the historic barriers created by inequalities based on race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, and other forms of social identity, is an essential part of any meaningful DEI effort. This will require real mechanisms for creating a campus environment where all students, faculty, and staff feel welcomed and feel valued, and where everyone is able to take full advantage of the resources and opportunities that make LSA the premier public liberal arts institution in the nation. Today is the first of our community forums, and our topic are our undergraduate students and our undergraduate academic programs. We'll focus tonight on those sections of the plan that address this topic. If you're also interested in other plan sections, and I sure hope you are, I encourage you to attend one of the other forums that we'll be having later this week, or provide feedback via the web. We have information all around the room about those other sessions and how to provide feedback online. Today's discussion is going to be led by my colleague, Associate Dean Angela Dillard, who leads the Division of Undergraduate Education, what I'm proud to call the first division of the college. Angela and her team in the Undergraduate Education Division played a crucial leadership role in pulling together this aspect of our plan. So Angela, please join me. I'd like to thank you all for your participation here tonight. I look forward to hearing what you have to say, ultimately to make our plan even stronger. With that, I'll turn things over to Angela, and I'll be back a little bit later on.
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. You know, I thought it was just going to be me and a couple of people in this big room all by myself, so it's really good to see you. So here's the agenda for today, what we're going to try and get through. Talk a little bit about fundamentals, talk a little bit about the planning process. I'm going to talk about 3 big chunks of the plan on access, undergraduate education initiatives, and inclusive classrooms. Let me also thank up front our student readers. So there were a number of undergraduate students that we reached out to and asked them to do 3 things: read the plan, come this evening and help us talk about it, and then give us their written feedback via our email address. If you're one of those volunteer readers, raise your hands. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate that. So here's what we hope to accomplish today. We want to share information about the plan, get your feedback on this draft, explore avenues for your own involvement should you want to be more involved in the plan, and then hear about your concerns and ideas. We have a lot of reasons why DEI matters. Dean Martin talked about a few. Our responsibility as a public institution is a big one, as well as how central these kinds of concerns with diversity, access, inclusion, equity are to the pursuit of excellence and knowledge for us as an institution and a community. We're really thinking across different dimensions of diversity, different identity categories, socioeconomic status, ability, disability status, gender expression, right? So we really tried to kind of, when we thought about the diversity parts of the plan, we wanted to make sure that we were thinking as broadly as possible. At the same time, the DEI doesn't mean sameness. Treating everyone exactly the same way at the same time isn't always consistent with DEI principles, especially the principles that have to do with equity and access. I love this graphic. I think it's just a nice way of thinking about the difference that we're talking about when we talk about what's different about equality and equity, and kind of what equity really can mean, especially from a broader social justice kind of perspective. Rob Sellers, who's an LSA faculty member and vice provost who's been guiding the university-wide DEI effort, has this really nice way of thinking about what these terms mean. It's kind of fun too because it's a party metaphor. So, you have to be invited. You have to be able to attend. Everyone should be able to contribute to the playlist, and at the end of the day, everybody gets to dance, right? So you think about how these three categories work together. They're not just three redundant words run together, right? I think we're trying to mean something particular by each one. We can talk more about the language of DEI, what's good about it, what needs work. One of the things we asked people to look at in reading the plan was, did we get the language right in the different sections? So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Let me talk a little bit about the planning process, what we've been up to. For undergraduate education, we did 2 capacity building workshops, Planathon, some of you may have recalled, some of you may have submitted ideas for that. We collected student-generated ideas. We committed to putting some of them in the plan. We tried to identify them in the draft at various places. There's also in the appendix a nice thank you to the various people who submitted ideas. So we were really happy to have that input at that stage from a number of undergraduates and other members of the community. We also, beyond Planathon, reviewed the race and ethnicity requirement last year. It took us all year to finish this review. It was a serious attempt to really drill down on this part of the curriculum. I think the report is great. We've been sharing it all summer since about July. If you want a copy, just email me. We're happy to have that out and about. The CSP Future Task Force, CSP is Comprehensive Studies Program, also gave us a lot of material to work with from the task force review from a couple of years ago. The Undergraduate Ed Climate Committee did a lot of work on sections of the plan. We consulted a lot of unit and program heads on multiple drafts. A lot of people did a lot of reading for us, and we are really deeply appreciative of that. We also have a lot of new and ongoing assessment work that we've been drawing on. And we have the historical context. I'm a historian, I'm a political historian, I specialize in ideology. And we really wanted to acknowledge in this process the role especially of BBUM, to kind of shape this moment as something that helped to propel what led to the steps that then led to this moment of strategic planning. In fact, the LSA plan acknowledges BBUM in the introductory section of our plan by including some of those tweets. I mean, we really wanted to have that voice front and center because we really want to acknowledge what that meant on this campus to get us to this point. Thousands of these tweets are still available if you just go to the hashtag BBUM. It's really kind of a nice, almost ethnographic source to keep in mind. We have made some progress to date, right? I mean, we haven't really been doing nothing, so, that's cool. We hired a staff DEI officer who's here, Letitia. Where are you? Raise your hand. Yay, Letitia. We initiated the laptop loan, which is one of the things I'll talk a little bit about. We're now in the second year of a 4-year pilot. We worked really hard this year to include DEI criteria in our own C fundraisers, which is how faculty and staff get merit raises on campus, at least in the college. And again, we reviewed the race and ethnicity requirement. There's more progress, but these are some of the ways, and I think it's important to keep in mind that it's a moving target, right? So while we were putting together the draft, we were also trying to implement some of the things, launch pilots, so there was a lot going on simultaneously. So let's talk a little bit about the plan itself. It has 6 main sections. 2 of the 6 are dedicated to undergraduate student issues, the section on access and the section on undergraduate education initiatives. I'll also touch briefly on the section on inclusive classrooms, which brings together undergraduates, graduate students, as well as faculty considerations. Access is the part of the plan that deals with how students get to the university. And it's a major component of the all-university plan that's going to be unveiled in early October. In part because admissions for us is something handled centrally by the Office of University Admissions and the Office of Enrollment Management. So LSA doesn't directly admit its own undergraduate class. I mean, we have a role in the process, and we have our own Office of Student Recruitment and Scholarship Support, right, that interacts with these centralized offices. At the same time, we do want to exert some influence and think carefully about admissions, recruitment, and retention, and student support via DEI principles. So this part of the plan deals with those kinds of questions. Not so much admitting the incoming class, but thinking about the role of admissions, recruitment, and retention in general. So one strategy for doing this for us has been the laptop loan pilot. This is also, too, a strategy that's about trying new things. And I'll talk a little bit as we move along about the different kinds of strategies that the plan mobilizes. This one is just try some new stuff, right? Have what all the really cool design thinking people call a bias for action, right? Just throw some stuff out there, see what happens. This is a good example of that. It was launched in fall 2015 and launched really not with this kind of, here's the master plan for what's going to happen. We just made this stuff up on the fly. It's been a really interesting thing to be a part of. We've given away, loaned 250 laptops to date, selecting students with family incomes under $50,000. 40% of those students were URM students in the 2 years that this has been up and running. One of the things that we're trying to do is to think about what's called the digital divide. Access from that point of view, right? So what do you need to really be successful on campus? What can we do in the space that's both recruitment and retention, right? That kind of, crisscrosses a number of different things simultaneously. This is a good example of that. We also, in terms of starting new things, have launched the LSA Opportunity Hub, which we really are thinking of as a DEI initiative, and that's really helpful. Right, so we're trying to build something like the hub that helps to prepare undergraduates in the college to make the most of their undergraduate education and then start to prepare not only for the first job, but for a lifetime in terms of their career opportunities. To think about building that with questions of access and equity built into the very bones of the thing, we think is really going to make a big difference. In fact, access is one of the things that we identify in the vision statement of the plan right in the front, where we write one of our highest priorities is to see that top students who come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, from under-resourced high schools, from underrepresented minority groups, and from small rural districts have the same opportunities to come to LSA and succeed as those who come from high schools that offer AP classes, fully stocked science labs, and class trips abroad, right? So what does it mean, right, to make sure that everybody gets, some of the same access to those kinds of benefits, right, in terms of what they do here with us as students. We really want to think that access doesn't stop at admissions, that it continues in academic and non-academic support for all students so that they reach their full potential. And so that we can do things like close the 4 to 5 year graduation rate, or to make sure that everybody gets to graduate having had an internship, study abroad, access to what's often called high-impact educational practices. The other component of this vision statement, liberal arts for life, also I think is embedded in the hub and what that's going to become for the college. It's a super interesting, really cool, really large initiative that we're launching. So that's a little bit about access. Another big section of the plan are goals for undergraduate education, right? So that space, so beyond, how people get here. And I think here too, there are multiple goals, multiple programs, lots of things going on in this section of the plan. It's one of the largest sections of the plan in which we're trying to think about a number of things simultaneously. And one strategy that this part of the plan uses is to double down on what works. Right, so one strategy, right, is just try new things, right, just that bias for action. The other part is, take a step back, really look at what's been working, and then try and build that, all right? So instead of just going off all of it in new directions, try to really kind of cultivate what sits at the heart that we know is working. The learning communities, we think, are an example of this. There are lots of examples of this. This is just one. The Michigan learning communities aligned with LSA are some of the most diverse communities on campus. They're intentional communities. They're communities that people want to join. That matters. And we really think that they do a great job at promoting student leaders. Another part of an initiative that we're looking at is to be really creative about questions with undergraduate programs and access. This is from a really beautiful campaign that CGIS, the Center for Global Intercultural Studies, has been running. And this is really interesting. So we're trying to raise a lot of money for scholarships, for people to be able to study abroad, right? Transformative experience for young people. But not everything is about money, right? So one of the things that CGIS found is that a lot of people just don't think that they're the kind of person who studies abroad. Right? So this campaign is about getting people to think about themselves as people who study abroad across multiple identity categories. And it's a really interesting approach to what we're trying to do. For me, one of the pressing parts in terms of moving from the draft that we have now to kind of what's really going to become like the year one plan is this thing about connecting to departments. And I left it a little blank because I think it's a big hole in the plan right now. I think this needs a lot of work. This takes a lot of time. LSA is huge. That's a lot of people to consult, to work with, to be aware of, to get them to then filter feedback. We just didn't have time to do this. But I do think that it does mean that that's part of the plan that we'll have to fill in over the course of the next few years and to think carefully about. I think one thing that's going to help us with filling in this part is a focus on transfer students. That crisscrosses across the plan in all kinds of ways. It's about access and admissions, and we do think that we can exert probably more control in that space than we can in how the incoming class gets admitted. We have to work with departments to be able to pull that off. We have to create a transfer receptive culture across the college, right? So we think that that's going to be helpful in starting to wed together a perspective in the plan that really highlights the strength of our departments. Inclusive classrooms, these parts of the plans are really close to my heart. They've been really interesting to be able to have a job like this and to think about what happens in the curriculum and pedagogy in the classroom, what we're already doing well, what we can be doing better. So it's been a real honor, I think, to work with so many other people on these parts of the plan. Again, the R&E review, this shows up a lot because we just worked so hard on this thing. And I think that committee did a great job in reviewing this part of the curriculum. Some of the things that came out of the review that we know that we want to commit to right away, more visibility and clarity for the requirement, more discussion and dialogue, right, in both seminar classes and in recitation sections, smaller sections. That one is going to be a really interesting one. It's expensive. So we don't know when we'll be able to figure out how to do that part of the plan, but it's definitely something that we want to work towards. Experimenting with this part of the curriculum, accessing IGR to launch a pilot called R&E Engagement, which I know that they are actively working on. I've been talking to people about how to launch something called Global R&E to help people make sense of those R&E courses that are non-US, international, global in nature, and why that matters, right? And why that's an important thing to have as part of the offerings of this requirement. We also have been experimenting with undergraduate course consultants. I think undergraduates are a tremendous resource. I think we ought to be tapping that resource more in terms of instruction and what happens in the classroom. And then we're thinking about creating an R&E advisory committee of undergraduates, which was a student-generated idea that came out of Planathon. We want to focus on STEM, especially first and second year STEM education. Kind of what makes for a more inclusive, a more welcoming, a more diverse style of instruction in STEM. There's a lot of work being done on this in a lot of places. This builds on some work that's already happening on our own campus with Rebuild, which is an acronym, but it's to use a research evidence-based approach to transforming what these foundational first and second year courses look like. We've also been involved in a cross-campus effort called Growing STEM, which is to build a pipeline from pre-college all the way through professional and medical school, which we have the capacity to do on this campus. We just have to figure out how to coordinate better. We also just today thought about a kind of on-ramp into that pipeline for transfer students, which is a really interesting thing to think about. So could we help people get here as transfer students and then get to medical school? And kind of what would that look like? We're also thinking about creating a Women in STEM Advisory Committee. It's something that was really strongly voiced by people in the Planathon process and in the other kinds of conversations that we had with different constituencies as we were putting the plan together. Also want to promote more community-based learning. It does a lot for recruitment, it does a lot for retention, it does a lot for how people think about their own identities, their place in the world, how to work with communities. I mean, I really want to find ways of growing this part of the curriculum and these kinds of offerings. We're also looking at more resources and rewards for inclusive excellence in the classroom. Right? I mean, one way to incentivize something that you want to see, well, two ways. One is to give it a lot of support, and the other is to give it a prize, right? And people love prizes, right? We're really motivated by that. And we want to make sure that we're using that as a strategy. We're also, again, looking at student advisory committees, and we're looking at ways of using students as partners and allies. And let me pause here to say that we in no way, shape, or form are saying that students, especially undergraduate students, are responsible for fixing climate problems, diversity problems, and access problems on this campus. I mean, we really want to be careful that we are not sending that as a message. For those students who do want to be involved in different kinds of things, we want to make sure that we're opening up opportunities, giving them resources, giving them guidance and training to be able to do that well. I think we're going to formally ask that all student organizations who receive college support and that we work with do an internal scan and discussion about whether or not they're fully embracing DEI principles in their own practices. You know, things like how are you scheduling? I mean, is the way that you're scheduling things, is something about how you're conducting your org prohibiting students from being able to fully participate? You know, to be able to have those kinds of conversations on a regular and serious basis. I know Optimize, which is one of the student orgs that LSA partners with, has been doing this. And I know a few of them are here. Raise your hand if you're in Optimize, yay. I've asked them to talk a little bit about, you know, when we get to the discussion about what that's been like for an org to try and step back and have those kinds of conversations. And we want to encourage that. Also, the Undergraduate Education Climate Committee seeks to operate in a space that brings together students, professional staff, and faculty in a variety of ways. Their subcommittee on student leadership and empowerment has for the past 3 years sponsored this late August Leadership in Action training for students who work across the division as peer advisors, mentors, and undergraduate education division programs, who we want to be able to help develop resources for them, tools for them to intervene, to be thought leaders, to be allies, to be diversity workers, because they work for us. Right, so we want to be able to use that as a resource, right? Give people training, build their capacity, help us with some of the climate issues on campus, and at the same time, get better prepared to enter into neighborhoods, communities, workplaces where you're just going to have to encounter the same issues, right? They're not going anywhere. So how do you build the capacity now to be good colleagues at work, to be good managers, to be good employers, to be good people who hire and retain people, to be good educators, right? So to try and do some of that stuff simultaneously. Let me also say that one of the things that we talk a little bit about in the plan, especially in the introductory section, is climate. But you'll notice, for those of you, and I know you have all read the plan, right, kind of beginning to end, you know, as you go on, like the plan really kind of digs down into really pretty concrete programs, approaches, strategies, and the climate stuff, while it's there, becomes a little less focused and central. I think that's something that we really want to think a lot about as a community. I think we want to know a little bit more about what the university-wide plan is going to do in that space, right? We want to be able to partner with student life, you know, with other kinds of student orgs across the university to really be able to think about that. But there's an intersection, I think, here in the parts of the plan that look at the climate committee and other ways that we're trying to engage students that we hope is going to be that kind of bridge that we'll be able to look at the other plans once they're more available and to see where is it that we can build some real connections and to really think about a critical mass role for undergraduates on campus, not only in LSA but university-wide.